I used to think growing old in your child's home was a kind of comfort, a sign you'd done something right. But the truth is, sometimes your presence becomes more like wallpaper. You fade into the background, quietly peeling at the edges, and no one bothers to fix it. I moved into my son's house after my husband Walter passed. The grief was still fresh, so sharp it physically ached. I thought being around family would help. I thought I'd be needed. But within weeks, I realized I had simply landed in the way. Breakfasts passed without a good morning. Dinners were taken at the kitchen island, just the three of them, my son, his wife, and their daughter. I was often told, gently and not so, that it was a school night, or just a quick bite tonight. Or my favorite, you wouldn't enjoy this restaurant anyway. They weren't cruel, not in any way you could write down and prove, but they were colder than silence. And when you're 75 and grieving, silence feels like the whole world forgetting you exist. My room was upstairs. They put me there for privacy, but it was really the furthest room from everyone else. Near the attic fan that groaned like an old ghost every night. I didn't complain. I never complained. Until the night I asked for help. It was a Thursday. My arthritis had been acting up all day, and I'd accidentally knocked my pill organizer behind the bathroom cabinet. I stood on my tiptoes, trembling, trying to reach it. I called out once, then again, louder. I heard their voices downstairs, laughing at the TV. When my son finally came up, his face was tight with impatience. "What now, Ma?" he said, not even stepping fully into the room. I explained as gently as I could that I just needed him to reach behind the cabinet. My fingers were too stiff. He stared at me for a moment, then scoffed. "You know what?" he said, voice low, jaw clenched. "Why don't you just go die somewhere quiet?" The words weren't shouted. They weren't dramatic, but they landed like gunfire in my chest. I froze, my lips parted, but nothing came out. He didn't apologize, didn't correct himself, just turned around and walked back downstairs like nothing had happened. I stood there for a long time after, felt my knees go soft, felt the medicine still out of reach, felt a part of me fold inward, not from pain, but from clarity. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I opened my old cedar chest and pulled out the same suitcase I used when I left. Walter, the first time when we were young and foolish and I thought I needed space. Funny how things circle back. I packed slowly. Just the essentials. Warm socks, my favorite scarf, the old photo of my parents by the lake, my pill organizer, my journal. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but I knew what I was leaving, and somehow that was enough. The next morning, I didn't wait for anyone to wake up. I left a note that said nothing more than, "Don't worry. I won't be a burden anymore." I walked 3 blocks to the bus stop with my suitcase in one hand and the cold biting at my wrists. The bus was already there, idling with its belly open, and the driver didn't even ask where I was going. Maybe I looked like someone who needed out. As the city shrank behind me, I stared out the window at the hills stretching in the distance. Somewhere behind those hills was a place I hadn't seen in over 50 years, the mountain town where I was born, where I once kissed a boy in a cornfield, where my mother taught me to braid hair and my father sang off-key while painting the porch. I hadn't meant to run away to there, of all places, but when I opened my wallet, my old driver's license still listed that address. I smiled. Maybe it was always supposed to end where it began. The town hadn't changed much. Still just one diner, one gas station, and a thrift shop that doubled as a post office. The air smelled of pine and memory. I found the cabin through a small ad, pinned on the library bulletin board, handwritten in blue ink. Modest rental. Clean, quiet, month-to-month welcome. That was all I needed. It sat on the edge of the lake, tucked behind a crooked pine, and it cost nearly all I had left after retirement. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like mine. There was no TV, no dishwasher, no thermostat, just a wood stove and silence, but the kind that holds you, not erases you. On my second day, I visited the town square, curious if anyone still remembered me. At the community center, I heard a voice, strong, familiar. Margie Whit. As I live and breathe, I turned and laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. It was June Avery, my childhood best friend. She looked the same, only now she had a silver streak in her braid and ran the town's community resource center like it was her own kingdom. She pulled me into a hug without asking and smelled of eucalyptus and lemon balm. We sat on the porch. Swing of the center that afternoon, catching up between sips of cinnamon tea, she told me about her divorce, her grandkids, how she'd come back to this place after her mother passed. "You look tired," she said softly, without judgment. I am, I admitted, but I think I'm also finally waking up. June gave me a set of keys to the community center's private reading room, said I could use it any time, so I started going there each morning with my journal. It had a dusty couch, a crooked lamp, and a window that looked out over the hills, and there I wrote, not poetry, Not stories. I wrote everything my son ever said to me that made me feel small. The times I paid for his braces, the way I drove for hours when his daughter had pneumonia, the words he used the night before I left, go die somewhere quiet. It wasn't for revenge, not then. It was just to make sure I never forgot how it happened, because when the world erases you, writing it down is the first act of rebellion, and I'd just begun. The strange thing about disappearing is not the silence that follows, it's how no one breaks it. No calls, no messages, not a single knock on the cabin door at first. I told myself they must be panicking, that they'd contact the police, that my son would send a text, maybe even one of those half-hearted apologies he used to give when he knew he'd gone too far. But nothing came. Not a whisper. Not a, "Did you get there safely?" Not a single check-in from the people I once would have given my last breath for. I was gone, and to them, it was as if I'd never existed. One morning, I went with June to the weekly farmers market outside town. It was chilly, and vendors huddled around thermoses like campfires. She picked up fresh eggs while I browsed candles I couldn't afford. Then I heard it. The soft voice of a little girl at a nearby booth. "She's turning 7 today," the mother said to the vendor, laughing. "She asked for a unicorn cake and glitter shoes." My stomach twisted. My granddaughter, the little girl I used to tuck in, the one who once drew me a picture of us holding hands under a rainbow, was turning 7 today, and no one had told me. I didn't cry. I didn't buy the candle. I just nodded politely and walked with June to the car in silence. Back at the cabin, I placed the child's old drawing, the one I'd packed carefully between the pages of my journal, up on the shelf above the wood stove. It fluttered slightly from the draft, like it was waving goodbye. But the next morning, something changed. June dropped by with a smile and a flyer in hand. "Old man Donovan finally needs help with his books," she said. "He runs that gardening shop off Main, can't tell a profit from a pansy anymore." I blinked. "You think he'd hire me? You were head accountant for 3 decades. The man should pay you to teach him." That's how I started working again, 2 days a week, 3 hours a shift. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough for tea, fresh apples, and the occasional newspaper, and more importantly, no one there treated me like I was furniture. Mr. Donovan was gruff, with eyebrows like storm clouds and hands permanently stained with soil, but he always greeted me with a "Mornin', Miss Whitlow," and left a cup of coffee by my little desk near the back window. Sometimes he'd ask questions about his ledgers. Other times we just worked in silence. I liked the silence now. It didn't hurt like before. It didn't mean absence. It meant freedom. I no longer had to tiptoe past slammed doors. No longer heard the mocking sighs when I asked questions. No longer watched my every word, like I was one wrong sentence away from exile. I made my tea at my own pace. I walked into rooms without apologizing. I went to bed early without guilt, and woke to birdsong rather than muffled arguments. It's funny, I used to think loneliness was the enemy, but I'd mistaken loneliness for solitude, and now, solitude felt like a warm, soft quilt, the kind you wrap around your own shoulders, because no one else will. I didn't come to this little town for revenge. I came here to disappear. But disappearing has a way of sharpening your memory, and one morning, while dusting off the corner shelf of my cabin, I stumbled across an old accordion folder. I'd almost forgotten about it. Was labeled in my handwriting, "Property documents." 1992 inside, the original deed to the house. My husband and I raised our son in a house I'd loved, maintained, and after Walter passed, finished paying off by myself. I stared at the final mortgage statement for a long time. The ink had faded, but the number was still clear. Paid in full. I remembered the moment I'd mailed that last check. The way I'd smiled, proud that I had kept the roof over all our heads, even while grieving, even while working weekends, even while my body ached in places I didn't know had names. When I moved into my son's home, I never questioned who the house truly belonged to. I'd simply assumed he'd taken care of the paperwork by now. But something, a whisper of instinct maybe, made me wonder. That afternoon, I caught a ride with June into town, told her I needed to visit the county office. She didn't ask why, just waited patiently in the car while I walked in with a folder under my arm and nerves in my throat. The clerk was kind, probably no older than my granddaughter. She typed the address into her computer and hummed quietly as she read. "You said you were just confirming ownership?" she asked, tilting the monitor slightly toward me. I nodded. She smiled politely, but her eyes were careful. "Looks like the deed still lists 2 names, Walter Whitlow and Margaret Whitlow. No updates, no transfer." My mouth went dry, so I still coned the house. "Technically, ma'am," she said, "you own it. Outright now. Since your husband passed and you're the surviving spouse, and since your name is still on the title," she paused. "You could sell it if you wanted. Just you." My fingers tightened around the folder. Sell it. The house where I was told to go die somewhere quiet. The house they assumed was theirs just because they'd filled it with new furniture and shut old doors. I walked out of that office feeling taller than I had in years. June watched me closely as I slid into the car. "You look like you just remembered something important," she said. I did. That evening I lit a candle and opened my journal. It wasn't bitterness I felt, not even anger. It was clarity. I had spent my whole life giving. I gave my son love, time, space, patience, my savings, my years. And what had he given back? A one-way ticket to silence? But now, the house I paid for, the one I scrubbed, painted, gardened, and wept in was mine again. Not because I fought for it, but because he'd never thought I mattered enough to take me off the deed. The next week, I made an appointment with a local real estate attorney named Mr. Corbin. June vouched for him, said he helped her after her divorce, and that he was discreet. He greeted me with a kind handshake and a cup of peppermint tea. I handed him the deed, the mortgage documents, and the most recent property tax bill. My son had unwittingly left my name on as he flipped through the paperwork. He looked up at me once. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Whitlow?" "No," I said, quietly, "but I'm ready." He nodded. "Then we'll begin the paperwork. We'll give them fair notice. 45 days. And if they fight it, it's your property," he said gently. "The law is on your side." For once, so was time. I walked back to the cabin as dusk settled over the hills. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. The wind smelled of pine and rain. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, because I hadn't gone looking for vengeance, but now that it had found me, I would not look away. The envelope was sent certified. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew they'd pretend they never got it if I didn't. It arrived on a Tuesday. I didn't see their faces. I wasn't there to hear the argument, but I could imagine it clearly. The way my son would tear it open at the kitchen island. Glance once, then twice, his face tightening with every line. How his wife would lean over his shoulder, gasping, before launching into one of her performances, hands in the air, pacing, maybe even tears. The letter was short, direct, carefully written by Mr. Corbin. "Dear Mr. Whitlow, this is formal notice that the property located at 214 Lawson Street is being prepared for sale by one of its legal owners, Mrs. Margaret Whitlow. You are advised to vacate the premises within 45 days, in accordance with state guidelines. Corbin and Fields, LLP." I hadn't even added a personal note. There was nothing left to say. The first call came that evening. I didn't answer. The second one came the next day. Then a third. I let them all go to voicemail. It wasn't until the fourth call, a blocked number, that I slipped up and picked up out of habit. My son's voice came through like a storm. "What the hell are you doing, Ma?" I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch. Let him feel it. "You can't do this to us, to your granddaughter. This is her home." I almost laughed now. She was his daughter again. Now they remembered the idea of family. "You told me to go die somewhere quiet," I said softly. "I just followed your instructions." There was a pause. Then venom. "You're bitter, spiteful. This isn't what Dad would have wanted." That name, Dad. He used it like a shield, so I reminded him. "Your father would have never let me sleep in the attic." He hung up without another word. Later that night, I sat by the wood stove and opened a different kind of envelope, one I had tucked away for years. Inside were photos. My old kitchen, bright yellow curtains, my garden tomatoes growing wild, a Polaroid of me and Walter painting the mailbox together, memories from the house before. They made it theirs. And that's when I remembered something else a day. Not even 6 months after I moved in, when I came home from a doctor's appointment to find half my things gone. No warning, no question, no apology. My favorite green mug, donated, the Afghan my mother crocheted. It didn't match the couch. Even my photo albums packed into boxes and shoved into the garage for storage. I found one of them opened later. Pages torn. My son said the water heater must have leaked. He barely looked up from his phone. I hadn't said anything back then, but the ache I'd swallowed that day, it had never gone away. So no, I didn't feel guilty. I left them for days. I could have done 30. I made sure they had legal notice. I didn't send movers in the night. They thought the house was theirs, but they never once treated it like it was home. And now, they would learn the truth the hard way. Home is not a place you inherit by blood, it's a place you honor by kindness, and they had neither. That Friday, Mr. Corbin called to confirm they had acknowledged receipt. He sounded hesitant, like he expected me to break down instead. I said, "Good. Let me know when the listing goes live." And then I walked to the lake. The water was still, the wind soft. I sat on the dock with my shoes off, toes just grazing the edge. The sun was setting behind the mountains, the exact same hue as the dress I wore the day I moved into that house. Decades ago, I whispered to the wind, To the ghosts of all the women who had swallowed their voices to keep the peace, I'm done swallowing. The house sold faster than I expected. A young couple bought it, newlyweds with a rescue dog and a baby on the way. They wrote a letter saying they'd always admired the hydrangeas out front and dreamed of raising a family. In a house with history, they didn't know the full history. Of course, but they promised to plant a maple tree in the yard? That was enough for me. I took my half of the proceeds and did something no one in my life would have expected. Not my son, not the neighbors, not even Walter. I bought myself a lakeside cottage. It wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms and a narrow porch with chipped railings. But the back window looked out over the water, and in the early morning, the mist would rise in silver threads that danced just above the surface. It was quiet, the kind of quiet people chase in retirement brochures, but this time, it was my quiet, not the silence. Someone banished me too, not the silence of being ignored. This was the stillness that comes after you've exhaled, the kind you choose for yourself. The first thing I did was buy succulents, tiny green rosettes that didn't need much but still gave back life. I placed them on every windowsill, bought ceramic pots with hand-painted sunflowers. It made the place smell like soil and lemon oil. I filled a shelf with poetry books, Mary Oliver, Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou. I even framed one line, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" and taped it to the fridge. Just beside the tea tins, there was no one to tell me what didn't match, no one to sigh. When I bought another cozy blanket, I filled the walls with color and quiet music, jazz in the mornings, soft folk at dusk. No one changed the station. No one said it was too much. One afternoon, June stopped by with a tall boy in a thrifted hoodie and scuffed sneakers. "This is Mason," she said. "He volunteers at the center, knows tech better than the mayor's it guy, and he's looking for a little extra work." Mason had a hesitant smile and calloused hands. I offered him a glass of ginger ale and asked if he knew how to set up Wi-Fi. He nodded and pulled out his phone. Within a day, my old laptop ran like new. My phone synced. My porch got strung with solar fairy lights. He even downloaded an app where I could listen to audiobooks while planting herbs. In return, I made him sandwiches, let him borrow books, showed him how to make lavender tea from my garden. We didn't talk much at first, just worked side by side in the flower beds. But eventually the words came. He told me about his mother passed 3 years ago, about how he still listens to her favorite music at night, about how he comes to the center because it's the one place no one treats him like he's broken. Nodded and told him the truth. That's why I came back here too. We became an unlikely pair, the old woman in linen cardigans and the teen with earbuds always in one ear. He helped me turn the guest room into a reading nook, taught me how to use voice commands, even fixed the screen door that never quite closed. Right. One evening, we sat on the porch as the sun slipped behind the hills. Mason handed me his phone. "I made you a playlist," he said. "Stuff I think you'd like." I pressed play. The first song was Ella Fitzgerald. The second was one of those new indie folk songs with too much reverb but a beautiful message underneath. And for the first time in a long while, I closed my eyes and felt joy rise in my chest. Not the loud kind, not the movie ending kind, but the kind that hums, low and steady, like a favorite tune you never get tired of. They told me to go die somewhere quiet. Instead, I bought peace and filled it with succulents, jazz, and the laughter of someone who chose to sit beside me. It happened on a Wednesday. The wind was soft that morning, rustling through the pine trees outside my cottage. I was steeping chamomile and organizing my seed packets by color when I heard the sound gravel crunching under tires. No one ever drove down my lane unless they meant to. I moved to the window slowly, heart already thudding in that old, familiar way, the one that comes when ghosts don't stay buried. The car door slammed, footsteps on the path. Then a knock, firm, heavy, male. I didn't need to look again. I already knew. My son. I stayed still, another knock. Then his voice muffled, annoyed but trying to sound composed. "Mom, you here?" I waited. "We need to talk." Another pause, he sighed. That same exasperated exhale he used to give me when I asked him to slow down at yellow lights. "Look, I know you're in there." I saw the lights. I saw the porch lights and the whatever those things are. Plants, succulents. The ones he said looked like moldy cabbages. The ones I loved. His tone shifted, practiced, almost tender. We're in a tight spot. Me and Candace, the apartment fell through. We're staying in a motel. It's not safe for Harper. Ah, so now he remembers he has a daughter. Now he remembers I was the one who used to rock her when she was sick. We just need a place for a bit. Just until we get back on our feet. Silence, then louder, with more bite. "You don't have to be cruel, you know." I get it. You're angry. But this is just petty. He waited again, but I didn't move, because here's the truth. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and fast. A fire. What I felt now was stillness. What I felt now was choice. I had lived a life of swallowing pain for the sake of keeping peace. I had smiled through slammed doors, apologized to keep conversations calm, pretended not to notice when my things were discarded like trash. But this one stayed closed. He tried again, softer this time. Mom, please, you raised me better than this. I almost laughed, because no, I raised him to believe I'd always say yes. I raised him to believe I would keep giving long after I had nothing left, but I wasn't that woman anymore. I stepped quietly to the door, not to open it, but just to be close enough for him to hear. I said, through the wood you told me to go die somewhere quiet. I'm just living quietly, something you never let me do. I heard the breath catch in his throat. Then, nothing. He stood there a moment longer, maybe hoping I'd break, maybe thinking of a better angle, a sharper guilt. But when none came, I heard the shuffle of footsteps, the car door, the engine fading into the trees. I didn't cry. I sat on my porch an hour later, barefoot, a cup of tea warming my palms. Mason came by that afternoon. He didn't ask why the gravel was freshly disturbed. He just handed me a loaf of banana bread his sister had baked and sat beside me in the swing, earbuds trailing from his pocket like vines. I told him the truth. Someone knocked today. Did you answer? No, I said, but I listened. He nodded like he understood, and somehow I think he did. People always talk about closure like it's a grand moment, but for me, it wasn't a scream or a slap or a second chance. It was just not opening the door and letting the silence sing. Peace doesn't come all at once. It's not a door you step through. It's a garden you grow slowly, pulling the weeds one by one. At first, I thought peace meant quiet, stillness, the absence of pain, but I've come to learn that peace is something else entirely. It's waking up without dread. It's making tea and knowing it'll still be warm when you sit to drink it. It's choosing who gets your time and who doesn't. It's not vanishing, it's reclaiming. My days are soft now in the mornings. I water my plants while the sun kisses the windows. I listen to birds that don't mind my company. Sometimes I write letters to myself in my journal, little reminders. You're not invisible. You still matter. They don't get to define you. I joined a program at the community center one June, helped organize. We mentor women over 60 who are starting over. Some left bad marriages, some lost everything in the shuffle of retirement. Some just needed someone to say it's not too late. I don't give speeches. I don't quote philosophers. I just tell them what I know, that choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you whole. One of the women, Darlene, was afraid to leave her son's basement. He kept promising he'd get back on his feet. But 5 years had passed and she was still folding his socks while sleeping on a couch that gave her back pain. I told her what I wished someone had told me. If they loved you like you loved them, you wouldn't be asking permission to breathe. She moved out 2 weeks later, sent me a photo of her new studio apartment, and a message that simply said, I finally opened the windows. I cried when I saw it. In my own home, I've created a ritual. Each Sunday, I sit in my armchair with a scrapbook I've titled Proof of Life. Inside are not just photographs, though. There are many. There are receipts for things I bought for no one but myself, sketches of the garden I planned with Mason, pressed wildflowers from hikes I took alone, sticky notes with quotes from audiobook. That made me laugh. The page from the county office confirming the deed transfer, and a photo of the key to this cottage, tied with a blue ribbon. One page is blank. Intentionally, it's not for what's missing, it's for what's still coming. Because peace isn't a place you arrive at and unpack, it's a place you learn to carry. My son hasn't called again. Sometimes I think about him. I wonder what stories he tells people. Maybe he says I ran off. Maybe he calls me bitter. Maybe he says I was confused or ungrateful or senile. But none of that matters because the people who know me, who really see me now, don't need proof. They see the joy in my steps, the stillness in my hands, the way my laugh doesn't sound like it's asking for permission anymore. Last week, Mason brought me a small ceramic tile. He found it at a yard sale. It said, let no one rent space in your head unless they're paying kindness. I nailed it right above my desk. That boy, without even knowing it, gave me a kind of son I'd never had. Not by blood, but by bond. He visits every Sunday now, brings me new songs, helps me plant mint and basil. We sit by the water and talk about everything and nothing. And sometimes, in the silence between us, I hear the version of myself I used to be, and I feel her smiling. I didn't vanish. I chose peace. And choosing peace every single day is the bravest thing I've ever done. He asked me to go die somewhere quiet. So I did. But first I made sure he'd hear my silence every single day. What would you do if someone told you to disappear? Would you stay silent or build something louder than words? Comment your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Your silence matters, but your voice even more.